The new fence, shimmering with an almost alien glow, stood tall and defiant along my property line, cutting off what the HOA Karen, a woman named Deborah, had so casually, so brazenly, given away. This wasn't just any fence, it was a gleaming, state-of-the-art electric barrier, humming with a low, almost imperceptible thrum. When the neighborhood woke up to its shocking presence, gasps rippled across perfectly manicured lawns. Deborah, whose cousin Brenda had been enjoying my lakefront as if it were her own private beach for weeks, turned a shade of crimson that clashed spectacularly with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair. The hum of the fence was a stark counterpoint to the sudden, unsettling silence that fell over the usually bustling lakeside community. Everyone knew what this meant, but no one dared to say it aloud. The battle lines had been drawn, and the war for my little slice of paradise had just begun. It all began subtly enough, as these things often do. My name is Alex, and I'd always considered myself lucky to live in Willow Creek, a quaint neighborhood known for its serene lake and friendly, if sometimes a little nosy, residents. My house, a charming bungalow with a sprawling backyard, opened directly onto the shimmering waters of Willow Creek Lake. It was my sanctuary, a place where I found peace watching the sunrise paint the sky over the water or listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I loved sharing it too. My neighbors, the Millers, often borrowed my canoe, and the Petersons would occasionally host small, quiet picnics on the edge of my lawn closest to the lake. We had an unspoken understanding, a neighborly give and take that made living here a joy. Then Deborah moved in 2 years ago. She bought the grandest house on the street, a monstrous McMansion that dwarfed everything else around it. From day one, she made it clear she was here to shake things up. Deborah joined the HOA board almost immediately and, within months, became its president. She introduced new rules about lawn gnome placement, dictated approved paint colors with an iron fist, and even tried to ban children's chalk drawings on sidewalks. Most residents just sighed and complied, preferring peace to pointless arguments. I tried to stay out of her way, hoping my quiet existence would keep me off her radar. My little sister, Sarah, often visited on weekends. Sarah was a free spirit, full of laughter and a deep love for nature. She adored the lake, spending hours skipping rocks and trying to spot the resident turtles. One sunny Saturday morning, we were out by the water, just enjoying the quiet, when Deborah strode over, her posture stiff, a clipboard clutched in her hand. "Alex," she began, her voice sharper than the lake breeze, "I noticed your sister has been spending quite a bit of time on the lakefront. As per the new HOA guidelines, all non-resident use of lake access points must be approved by the board." I blinked. "Deborah, this is my property. And Sarah is my sister. She's a guest." Guest or not, access to the lake from private property, if it impacts the community aesthetic or shared resources, falls under HOA jurisdiction, she countered, flipping a page on her clipboard. "We're trying to maintain a certain standard here, Alex. This isn't a public beach." I tried to keep my voice even. "I understand, Deborah, but this is my backyard. I've always let neighbors use the lake from here, quietly. It's never been an issue." "Well, it's an issue now," she stated, her eyes narrowing. "Effective immediately, only registered homeowners are permitted to access the lake from any property line. Guests must use the designated community access point 2 blocks down." I felt a surge of frustration. This was ridiculous. The community access point was a small, rocky patch, hardly ideal for anything more than launching a tiny kayak. My lakefront, with its gentle slope and sandy bottom, was perfect for swimming or just sitting by the water. I argued with her for a few more minutes, but it was like talking to a brick wall made of HOA bylaws. She left, declaring the matter closed. Sarah, sensing my annoyance, put a comforting hand on my arm. "It's okay, Alex. We can go to the community spot. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was the principle of it. My property, my rules, or so I thought. I decided to ignore Deborah's absurd pronouncements for a while. After all, what could she really do? It was my land. Life continued, albeit with a new undercurrent of tension. I still enjoyed my lakefront, though I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, half expecting Deborah to materialize with another ridiculous rule. The Millers and Petersons, sensing the shift, politely declined my invitations to use the lake, not wanting to cause trouble. I understood, but it saddened me. The communal spirit of Willow Creek was slowly eroding under Deborah's reign. One crisp autumn afternoon, a new family moved into the house next door to Deborah. They were her cousins, a woman named Brenda and her husband, Steve. Brenda was a younger, less severe version of Deborah, but with a similar air of entitlement. I waved hello when I saw them unpacking, but Brenda only gave me a fleeting, almost dismissive nod. A few weeks later, I noticed Brenda and Steve spending a lot of time on my lakefront. Not just passing by, but setting up lounge chairs, picnicking, even bringing a portable grill. They would walk from their house, through Deborah's yard, and then directly onto my property to access the water. At first, I assumed they were just visiting Deborah and maybe hadn't realized where my property line ended. I decided to be neighborly and give them the benefit of the doubt. One morning, I was enjoying my coffee on the back porch when I saw Brenda laying out a large towel right at the water's edge, precisely where my property met the lake. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, looking perfectly content. I walked over, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Good morning, Brenda," I said. She peered over her sunglasses. "Oh, hey, Alex. I just wanted to mention," I began, gesturing vaguely towards the water, "this is actually my property here. The lake access is just a little further down, at the community point." Brenda sat up, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh, I know, sweetie. Deborah told us. She said since her property doesn't have direct lake access, and yours does, she had the HOA rezone a small portion of your lakefront for community use, so we could enjoy it. Isn't that just swell?" My jaw dropped. Rezone a portion of my property? Without my knowledge or consent? This wasn't a less extreme event. This was a direct assault. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it. Deborah hadn't just given my lakefront to her cousin, she had tried to legalize the theft. "Rezone?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "That's impossible. You can't just rezone private property." Brenda shrugged, lying back down. "Well, Deborah said she did. She's the HOA president, after all. She knows all the rules." I stood there, stunned, watching Brenda settle back into her sunbathing. The tranquil lake, once a source of peace, now seemed to mock me with its calm surface. A storm was brewing, and it wasn't just in the weather. The hum of the electric fence, though still months away from its installation, already echoed in my ears. This was beyond petty HOA squabbles. This was war. The revelation that Deborah had supposedly rezoned a portion of my lakefront sent a cold wave of shock through me. It wasn't just a rude neighborly act. It felt like a blatant act of theft, a calculated move to strip away my property rights. My mind raced, trying to grasp the audacity of it all. How could an HOA president, even one as power-hungry as Deborah, unilaterally rezone private land? This wasn't some obscure bylaw about garden gnomes, this was about deeds and property lines, things that were supposed to be set in stone. I retreated into my house, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. I pulled out my property deed, a thick packet of official-looking papers that had been tucked away in a safe drawer for years. I meticulously read through every line, every clause, looking for any mention of shared access, easements, or anything that could remotely justify Deborah's claim. There was nothing. My deed clearly stated my ownership extended to the lake's edge, with no provisions for public or community access. My property was exactly that, mine. The next morning, armed with my deed and a simmering rage, I marched over to Deborah's house. I knocked firmly on her imposing front door, which was painted a shade of blue so deep it almost looked black. After a moment, Deborah herself opened it, looking as perfectly put together as ever, even early in the morning. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the grim expression on my face and the papers clutched in my hand. "Alex," she said, her voice a little less sharp than usual, "to what do I owe this early morning visit?" "This," I stated, holding up my deed, "is my property deed. It clearly shows that my land extends to the lake, with no community access rezoning." "What exactly did you tell Brenda?" Deborah's composed facade wavered for a split second. She recovered quickly, a practiced smile appearing on her lips. "Oh, that. Well, Alex, as HOA president, I have the authority to make certain adjustments for the betterment of the community. Your lakefront, being so spacious, was an ideal candidate for shared use. It's really for everyone's benefit, you see. Brenda and Steve were just the first to take advantage of it." "Benefit?" I practically scoffed. "You can't just take a piece of my private property and declare it community use without my consent. That's illegal." She folded her arms, her smile tightening. Now, Alex, let's not use such strong words. It was a perfectly legitimate board decision. We voted on it." "Voted on it?" I demanded. "When? I'm a homeowner. I should have been notified. I should have had a say." "It was an executive board decision," she said, dismissively waving a hand. "Some matters are too sensitive for general homeowner votes. Besides, you're always so busy, I didn't want to bother you with the details." Her condescending tone fueled my anger. "You didn't want to bother me? You essentially stole part of my land and then let your cousin set up shop on it." "It's not stealing, Alex," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It's community enhancement. Think of the greater good. A more accessible lakefront for all." "It's my lakefront," I shot back. "And I don't recall seeing any new signs indicating this community access point or any official documentation from the HOA about this rezoning. Deborah's eyes hardened. "There's no need for signs when the community is aware. And the documentation is, of course, on file with the HOA. I can assure you, everything was done by the book." She then glanced at her watch. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important HOA meeting to prepare for." She started to close the door, clearly trying to dismiss me. I put my hand on the door to stop her. "This isn't over, Deborah. Not by a long shot." "Oh, I think it is," she said, pushing the door shut with surprising force, leaving me standing on her porch, seething. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of research. I scoured the internet for information on HOA powers, property rights, and zoning laws. I called a real estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who listened patiently to my story. He confirmed my suspicions. An HOA absolutely cannot unilaterally rezone private property without the homeowner's explicit consent and a proper legal process involving local government. Deborah's claims were baseless, bordering on fraudulent. He advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they retract their decision and that Brenda and Steve vacate my property. Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, I drafted the letter with Mr. Henderson's help, detailing the illegality of Deborah's actions and threatening legal action if they didn't comply within a week. I sent it via certified mail to the HOA's official address, making sure to get a return receipt. A few days later, I saw Brenda and Steve still enjoying my lakefront. They seemed to have taken Deborah's words as gospel, treating my backyard as their personal retreat. My blood pressure soared every time I saw them lounging there, sometimes even leaving behind empty soda cans or crumpled snack wrappers. It felt like they were rubbing their entitlement in my face, secure in the knowledge that Deborah had their back. Then, a week after I sent the letter, I received a response from the HOA. It wasn't from Deborah, but from the HOA's legal counsel, a firm I hadn't known they even had. The letter was short, formal, and utterly dismissive. It stated that the HOA maintained its position regarding the community access to my lakefront, citing an obscure, vaguely worded clause in the original community charter about preserving communal harmony and access to natural resources for the collective good. It basically told me to back off or face legal fees for a frivolous lawsuit. The signature at the bottom was not Deborah's, but it was clear she was behind this, pulling strings. This wasn't just a low point. It was a devastating blow. They weren't just ignoring me, they were using their legal team to intimidate me. The thought of a long, expensive legal battle against the HOA, with their seemingly endless resources, was daunting. Doubt crept in. Was I really going to fight a whole organization over a patch of grass by the lake? But then I looked out at my beautiful lakefront, now occupied by strangers, and the anger returned, stronger than ever. This wasn't just about the land. It was about principle, about standing up for what was right. The very next morning, I woke to the distinct sound of hammering and muffled voices coming from my backyard. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed to the window, throwing back the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. Brenda and Steve were out on my lakefront, but they weren't just lounging. They were actively constructing something. With alarming speed, they were hammering wooden stakes into the ground and stringing what looked like rope between them, marking out an even larger section of my property. They were expanding their claim, clearly undeterred by my letter, emboldened by the HOA's legal backing. This wasn't just an extreme event, it was a declaration of war, a brazen act of territorial expansion right under my nose. I knew then that my previous plans weren't enough. I needed to escalate, to do something so undeniably impactful that it would send a clear message. The time for polite letters was over. Seeing Brenda and Steve actively staking out a larger section of my lakefront felt like a punch to the gut. It was a brazen, undeniable act of aggression. They weren't just using the space, they were annexing it, marking it as their own, confident in Deborah's backing. The sight ignited a furious determination within me. The time for polite requests and legal letters had clearly passed. It was time for a more physical response. I couldn't let them simply walk all over me, or rather, all over my property. I spent the rest of that day in a haze of furious planning. My initial thoughts were wild and impractical, building a giant wall, digging a moat. But then a more cunning, and far more effective, idea began to form. It involved precision, technology, and a touch of undeniable flair. I remembered seeing a special type of high-tech fencing advertised online, designed for security but with an aesthetic appeal. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it had an added feature that would deliver a very clear, very memorable message. The next morning, before Brenda and Steve had even emerged for their morning lakefront commute, I made some calls. I found a company specializing in advanced security solutions, explaining my situation with a carefully neutral tone. I omitted the HOA drama, simply stating I needed a robust, clear boundary for my property. They understood completely and sent a team out for a consultation that very afternoon. The lead technician, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, listened intently as I explained my needs. I wanted something that would mark my boundary unmistakably, something that would discourage casual trespass without causing harm. She proposed a state-of-the-art electric fence system. It's not designed to hurt, Alex, she explained, but to give a very unpleasant, surprising jolt. Enough to make anyone think twice about touching it again. It's perfectly legal for property boundaries as long as proper warning signs are displayed. A mischievous grin spread across my face. Perfect, I said, absolutely perfect. We discussed the design. I wanted it sleek, modern, something that would stand out but not be an eyesore. It would follow my exact property line, from the edge of my house all the way to the water's edge, effectively cutting off the community access Deborah had so generously bestowed upon her cousin. The cost was substantial, but at this point, it felt like an investment in my sanity and the sanctity of my home. We scheduled the installation for the following week. It would take a few days to build, but the impact, I knew, would be immediate and profound. In the days leading up to the installation, I tried to act as normally as possible, though my internal excitement was bubbling. Brenda and Steve continued their daily routine, setting up their chairs, splashing in my lake, completely oblivious to the electrifying surprise heading their way. I saw Deborah occasionally, giving me sharp, triumphant looks, convinced she had won. Her smugness only fueled my resolve. Then came the day of installation. The crew arrived bright and early, a small convoy of trucks and equipment. They were efficient and discreet, working with a quiet determination. They started at the back of my house, extending the fence outwards towards the lake. The posts were sleek, metallic, and the wires, though thin, had a subtle gleam. The hum of the equipment was low, masked by the general sounds of the neighborhood. I watched from my kitchen window as the fence took shape, each section a testament to my unwavering resolve. Neighbors, intrigued by the activity, started peeking out of their windows. The Millers waved cautiously, and I gave them a small, reassuring nod. They seemed to understand, without me saying a word, that this was about more than just a fence. By late afternoon, the fence was nearly complete, stretching like a futuristic silver ribbon towards the lake. The crew began installing the small, discreet warning signs at regular intervals. Warning, electric fence. The lettering was clear, unmistakable. As the last section clicked into place and the technicians began their final checks, a low, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the wires. It was alive. It was ready. The true test, however, would come the next morning. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the scenarios, wondering how Brenda, Steve, and especially Deborah, would react. I imagined the confusion, the outrage, the dawning realization of what I had done. Sure enough, the next morning, the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the lake and, more importantly, over my brand-new, humming fence. I stood by my window, a cup of coffee forgotten in my hand, waiting. It wasn't long before Brenda and Steve emerged from Deborah's house, towels slung over their shoulders, thermos in hand, ready for their usual lakefront picnic. They strolled casually through Deborah's yard, their laughter echoing faintly in the crisp morning air. They reached the edge of my property, the spot where they usually cut across. And then they stopped. Dead in their tracks. Their eyes, at first scanning for their usual path, fell upon the shimmering, humming barrier that now stood squarely in their way. Brenda's jaw literally dropped. Steve squinted, as if trying to make sense of this impossible obstacle. Their voices, which had been light and carefree moments before, died in their throats. They looked at each other, then back at the fence, then towards my house. It was clear they couldn't believe their eyes. Then, Brenda, always the more assertive of the two, took a tentative step forward. She extended her hand, as if to touch the wire, to confirm its reality. I held my breath, a thrill of anticipation coursing through me. This was the moment. She hesitated, her fingers hovering just inches from the gleaming surface. Steve, sensing her intention, quickly grabbed her arm, pulling her back. He had seen the warning signs, small as they were. His eyes, now wide with alarm, darted to the signs. The silence that followed was deafening. No more laughter, no casual strolls. They stood there, utterly bewildered, completely cut off from their usual access. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph for me, a silent declaration that this was my land, and trespass would no longer be tolerated. Brenda looked utterly dumbfounded, while Steve's face was a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The realization of what this fence truly meant began to settle over them, but the full impact, the magnitude of the neighborhood's reaction, was yet to unfold. That, I knew, would be the next act in this unfolding drama. The sight of Brenda and Steve frozen in place, utterly flummoxed by the new fence, brought a profound sense of satisfaction. Their shock was palpable, a silent scream of disbelief. They stood there for a long moment, their eyes darting between the humming wires and my house, as if waiting for me to magically dismantle it. When it became clear I wasn't going to, a slow, angry flush crept up Brenda's neck. She started muttering to Steve, gesturing wildly at the fence, her voice too low for me to hear from my window, but her frustration was clear. They eventually turned and stomped back towards Deborah's house, their beach day plans thoroughly ruined. I spent the rest of the morning enjoying my coffee in peace, the subtle hum of the fence a comforting lullaby. My lakeside view, which had been a source of irritation for weeks, was now utterly serene, truly mine once more. The Millers and Petersons, along with a few other neighbors, stopped by later, ostensibly to chat about the weather, but their eyes kept flicking to the fence. Their expressions were a mix of awe, curiosity, and a hint of suppressed amusement. They offered discreet nods of approval, a silent acknowledgement that I had done what many of them wished they could. Mrs. Peterson even brought over a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies, a clear sign of support. It was a small, quiet victory, a testament to the fact that not everyone in Willow Creek was beholden to Deborah's iron rule. The calm, however, was short-lived. Just as I expected, Deborah herself made an appearance early that afternoon. She stormed across her lawn, her face contorted into a mask of pure fury. Brenda and Steve trailed behind her, looking like two children caught with their hands in the cookie jar, a mixture of indignation and embarrassment on their faces. "Alex!" Deborah shrieked, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon air. "What is the meaning of this monstrosity?" She gestured wildly at the fence, her arm trembling with rage. I stepped out onto my back porch, maintaining a calm demeanor. "It's a fence, Deborah. A very necessary fence, as it turns out." "A fence?" she practically screeched. "This is an electric fence. You can't just put up something like this. It's dangerous. It's unsightly. It goes against every single HOA regulation." "Actually," I replied, my voice steady, "it's perfectly legal. I checked. It's on my private property, clearly marked with warning signs, and designed to deter rather than harm. As for HOA regulations, I believe your recent rezoning of my property without my consent or any legal basis goes far more against established law than my fence does against your ever-changing rules." Deborah's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson. That rezoning was a legitimate executive board decision. "There was no legitimate board decision, Deborah," I countered, my patience wearing thin. "My lawyer confirmed it. You have no legal right to dictate access to my private property, nor can you unilaterally rezone it. This fence," I gestured along its gleaming length, "simply reinstates the boundaries that were always legally mine. It's a physical manifestation of my property rights." Brenda piped up, her voice whiny. "But Deborah said we could use it. She said it was for the community." "Brenda, your cousin told you something that was entirely false," I said, looking directly at her. "This has always been my private property. I've been kind enough to share in the past, but when that kindness was abused and my property stolen, I had to take action." Deborah, regaining some of her composure, drew herself up to her full height. "This is an act of aggression, Alex. An unneighborly provocation. The HOA will not stand for this. You will remove this abomination immediately, or face severe fines." "Fines for protecting my own property?" I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I think you'll find that any fines you attempt to levy will be met with a swift and decisive legal challenge. I'm quite prepared for it, Deborah. Are you?" My question hung in the air, a challenge thrown directly at her. Deborah sputtered, clearly unaccustomed to such direct defiance. She glared at me, then at the fence, then at her whimpering cousin. Finally, with a huff of exasperation, she spun on her heel and stalked back to her house, Brenda and Steve scrambling to follow. The silence that descended after their departure was thick, filled with the unspoken tension of a battle just begun. I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Deborah was not one to back down easily, especially when her authority and pride were so publicly challenged. The fence was a powerful statement, but I suspected she would retaliate with every bureaucratic weapon in her HOA arsenal. And I was right. The very next day, a formal letter arrived from the HOA. It was a thick envelope, brimming with official-looking documents. It wasn't just a fine, it was a multi-pronged assault. The letter stated that I was in violation of no less than 5 separate HOA bylaws. Unauthorized structural alteration, disruption of community aesthetic, creation of public hazard, failure to submit architectural plans for approval, and, most ridiculously, actions detrimental to community harmony. Each violation carried a hefty daily fine, accumulating rapidly. The total potential fines listed were astronomical, designed to scare me into immediate compliance. It also stated that if the fence was not removed within 72 hours, the HOA would arrange for its removal and charge me for the costs, along with additional punitive fees. This was a clear escalation, a legal sledgehammer designed to crush my resistance. It was an extreme event, pushing the boundaries of what I believed an HOA could legally do, and it confirmed that Deborah was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to assert her dominance and reclaim what she saw as her community lakefront. The HOA's letter, with its lengthy list of violations and astronomical fines, felt like a direct punch. It was designed to intimidate, to make me crumble under the weight of potential financial ruin. Deborah was playing dirty, throwing everything she had at me. But instead of fear, a steely resolve hardened within me. They wanted a fight? They were going to get one. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about standing my ground against bullying and overreach. My first call was to Mr. Henderson, my real estate lawyer. I faxed him the multi-page letter from the HOA, and he called me back within the hour. His voice was calm but firm. "Alex," he said, "this is exactly what I expected. They're trying to out-resource you, to bury you in paperwork and threats. But don't worry, they're on very shaky legal ground here." He explained that while HOAs do have power, it's not unlimited. They can't supersede state and local property laws, and arbitrarily levying fines for actions taken on private property, especially when those actions are in response to the HOA's own illegal behavior, wouldn't hold up in court. He advised me to send a formal legal response, reiterating my position and challenging every single one of their alleged violations. He also suggested filing a counterclaim for harassment and interference with my property rights. The legal battle was officially on. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of legal back and forth. Mr. Henderson drafted a scathing reply to the HOA, meticulously dissecting each of their accusations and citing relevant statutes that proved their claims were baseless. He formally demanded they cease and desist their harassment, retract all fines, and acknowledge my undisputed property boundaries. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was clear: I wasn't backing down. During this time, the neighborhood was abuzz. The fence stood as a silent monument to the ongoing feud. People would slow down their cars as they drove past my house, craning their necks to get a glimpse. Whispers followed me at the grocery store. Most residents avoided Deborah, a clear sign that her aggressive tactics were not earning her many friends. The Millers and Petersons continued their quiet support, often stopping to chat, their unspoken encouragement a balm to my frayed nerves. They knew what Deborah was like, and they admired my courage in standing up to her. Brenda and Steve, however, remained a persistent, if now distant, nuisance. They could no longer access the lake from my property, but they still lingered around Deborah's backyard, casting resentful glares at my fence. I often saw Deborah on her phone, pacing her lawn, clearly strategizing her next move. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a simmering resentment that promised another eruption. One afternoon, a large, official-looking truck pulled up outside my house. Two men in work uniforms got out, carrying clipboards and what looked like measuring tape. They began walking along my property line, pausing at the fence, taking notes and photos. My heart pounded. Had the HOA actually sent people to try and remove my fence? This was an extreme event, a direct confrontation. I walked out to meet them, my posture firm. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. One of the men, a burly guy with a no-nonsense expression, looked up from his clipboard. "We're from the county zoning office, ma'am. We received a complaint about an unauthorized structure and potential property line dispute. We're here to investigate and verify boundaries." My heart sank. Deborah hadn't just relied on HOA threats, she had escalated it to the county level, trying to use official channels to force my hand. This was a classic Deborah move, use legitimate-sounding procedures to mask her personal vendetta. "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And who filed this complaint?" He consulted his clipboard. The complaint was filed by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, President Deborah Jenkins. Of course. I explained the situation to them, showing them my deed and pointing out the clear warning signs on the fence. I calmly laid out the history, explaining how Deborah had illegally claimed part of my property for her cousin and how the fence was a necessary measure to protect my legal boundaries. The men listened, their expressions unreadable. They continued their measurements, then took more photos of my property, Deborah's property, and the fence from various angles. After about 20 minutes, the burly man nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am. We'll file our report. We'll need to review the HOA's bylaws against county and state property laws. You'll receive official notification of our findings." They packed up their equipment and left, leaving me feeling a mix of apprehension and cautious optimism. Their objective demeanor gave me a sliver of hope that they would see through Deborah's machinations. The waiting game began again. Days turned into a week, then 2. Brenda and Steve were still around, but they kept their distance from the fence, clearly wary. Deborah remained stony-faced, avoiding eye contact when we passed. The quiet hum of the fence was a constant reminder of the unresolved tension. Then, just when I started to wonder if the county had forgotten about the issue, I received another official letter. This one, however, had the county seal prominently displayed. I ripped it open, my hands trembling slightly. It was a formal ruling from the county zoning board. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, searching for the verdict. The letter confirmed that, after a thorough review of property records, HOA bylaws, and local ordinances, my fence was indeed fully compliant with all county regulations. It stated that my property boundaries were legally undisputed and that the HOA had no authority to rezone or claim any portion of my private land for community use without my express consent and a proper legal eminent domain process, which had not occurred. It also stated that any fines levied by the HOA based on these particular violations were deemed null and void. The county had sided with me. It was a monumental victory, a legal triumph that validated my stance and thoroughly undercut Deborah's authority. This was a huge high, a major turning point in the war, a moment where the tide definitively shifted in my favor. The county's ruling was a breathtaking victory, a moment of pure vindication. It wasn't just a win for me, it was a loud, clear declaration that Deborah's reign of HOA terror had its limits. I felt a surge of relief, followed by a quiet sense of triumph. The fence, still humming softly, now stood as a symbol of unwavering defiance, legally affirmed. I immediately sent a copy of the county's decision to Deborah and the HOA board, though I suspected she'd already heard the news through the neighborhood grapevine. The days that followed were surprisingly calm. Brenda and Steve were nowhere to be seen near my lakefront, their usual presence replaced by an almost eerie quiet. Deborah, too, seemed to vanish from public view. She didn't appear for her usual morning walk, and her perfectly manicured lawn seemed strangely untouched by her presence. The neighborhood, usually a hub of activity and gossip, held its breath, waiting for Deborah's inevitable, desperate counterattack. Everyone knew she wouldn't let this slide. This was a massive humiliation for her, and Deborah Jenkins was not a woman who tolerated humiliation. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called to congratulate me. "This is huge, Alex," he said, his voice genuinely pleased. "They have no legal leg to stand on now. Any further action from the HOA would be pure harassment, and we'd have a very strong case against them." He advised me to simply enjoy my lakefront and let them stew. And I did. I spent hours by the water, soaking in the peace, watching the ducks glide across the surface. The fence was a constant reminder of the battle I had fought and won, but now, instead of anger, it evoked a sense of hard-won peace. The Millers and Petersons started bringing their kids over again, sitting by the lake, enjoying the renewed sense of community. The atmosphere in Willow Creek, for the first time in a long time, felt lighter. Then came the truly extreme event, the wild ending no one, not even I, could have predicted. It happened late one Tuesday night. I was asleep when a piercing, high-pitched wail sliced through the silence, followed by a rapid succession of frantic barks. My dogs, usually calm sleepers, were going wild. I jolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a stray cat, this was something serious. I rushed to the window overlooking the lake, my mind racing through possibilities. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon and my security lights, was Deborah. But she wasn't alone. She was with Brenda and Steve, and they were doing something utterly bizarre. They had brought a small, inflatable raft, a cheap, bright yellow thing, and were attempting to launch it into the lake, right next to my fence. Deborah, in a ridiculous attempt to circumvent the fence, was trying to paddle around the end of it, in the shallow water where my property met the lake. Brenda and Steve were pushing her, giggling hysterically, clearly fueled by some ill-advised late-night bravado, possibly alcohol. They were muttering about finding a loophole and showing that fence who's boss. As they shoved the raft, Deborah, who was already struggling to get into it gracefully, lost her footing. With a cartoonish splash and a high-pitched shriek, she tumbled headfirst into the icy cold lake. The raft capsized, sending Brenda and Steve stumbling backward, laughing even harder now. Deborah emerged from the water, sputtering and gasping, her perfectly coiffed hair now plastered to her head, her clothes soaking wet. She looked like a drowned rat, shivering uncontrollably. The dignity she always carried was utterly gone, replaced by a comical mess. Brenda and Steve, momentarily forgetting their own mission, were doubled over with laughter, pointing at her. But the real shock came next. As Deborah flailed, trying to regain her footing in the slippery mud near the shore, her hand, still grasping for something to hold onto, accidentally brushed against the lowest wire of my electric fence. A sharp crackle echoed across the still water, followed by Deborah's most ear-splitting shriek yet. It wasn't the kind of yelp you make from a small surprise, it was a full-bodied, utterly undignified caterwaul of pure, unadulterated shock and discomfort. She recoiled instantly, falling back into the shallow water with another splash, her arms windmilling. Brenda and Steve's laughter died abruptly, replaced by gasps of horror. They rushed forward, pulling Deborah out of the water, who was now trembling not just from the cold, but from the lingering sensation of the electric jolt. She looked utterly terrified, her eyes wide and bloodshot. The silence that followed was broken only by her ragged breathing and the frantic yaps of my dogs. I watched, frozen, from my window. It was a chaotic, humiliating spectacle. The grand HOA Karen, brought low by her own hubris and a harmless, legally compliant fence. The very next morning, the neighborhood was alive with whispers, though no one mentioned the specific details of Deborah's nocturnal aquatic adventure. Mrs. Peterson came over with a fresh batch of muffins, her eyes twinkling. "Heard things were a bit lively last night, Alex," she said, barely suppressing a giggle. "Seems some people learned a shocking lesson about respecting boundaries." And that was it. The very next day, "For sale" sign appeared in Deborah's yard. It was a massive, bright red sign, impossible to miss. Within a week, she, Brenda, and Steve were gone, their grand McMansion standing empty. The HOA quickly elected a new, much more reasonable president, and life in Willow Creek returned to its peaceful, neighborly rhythm. My lakefront remained my sanctuary, the hum of the fence a quiet reminder of the day a Karen learned the hard way that some boundaries are, quite literally, electrifying.